They are rarely the loudest in the room. They do not posture. They do not rush to be seen. Calm men move like still water, and still water hides depth. In ancient Japan, warriors were not taught to shout their strength. They were taught to bury it, to sharpen it in silence, to master fear without announcing victory, because the most dangerous man is not driven by ego. He is governed by presence. This is not the calm of weakness. This is not peace born from comfort. This is controlled fire, contained by discipline, refined by suffering, and sharpened through an ancient system of mastery. In this story, you will follow a young warrior whose fear speaks louder than his sword, a man who believes strength must be proven, who mistakes noise for power, who bleeds energy chasing respect, until he meets a mentor who does not correct him with words, but with silence. What follows is not a tale of combat, but of internal war, a journey where the greatest enemy is not an opponent, but the self that trembles when unobserved. This is a path carved through restraint, through stillness, through the slow death of ego. Because when chaos arrives, the calm man does not rise to the occasion. He is already there. Before the blade was named, before the armor learned its weight, there was noise. Not the sound of steel, not the clash of enemies, but the noise inside a young man who did not yet know himself. He woke before dawn, breath already shallow, mind already racing. His body moved fast, too fast. Every step was sharp, every motion deliberate yet unmeasured, like a drum beaten without rhythm. He trained as if time were chasing him, as if stillness itself were an enemy that would expose his weakness if allowed to linger. In the training yard, his strikes were aggressive, clean, loud. Observers mistook this for strength, but the elders saw something else. They saw excess. His sword cut the air with urgency, but his shoulders tensed before each strike. His feet moved before his center had settled. He attacked shadows that had not yet formed. In simulated combat, he overwhelmed weaker opponents quickly, yet struggled against calm ones, not because they were stronger, but because they were quieter. He mistook effort for mastery, motion for meaning, noise for power. Inside his mind there was no rest. Every moment was a calculation. Am I enough? Am I seen? Am I falling behind? Even in ritual washing his hands, tying his belt, his thoughts leapt ahead to imagined battles, imagined failures, imagined judgments. Modern science would later give this state a name. Hypervigilance, a nervous system trapped in permanent readiness, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline, useful in danger, destructive in life. The body sharpened itself daily for a war that was not yet happening. The ancients described it more simply. An unforged spirit makes noise at night when the yard emptied and the wind moved freely through the pines. He could not sit. Silence pressed against him like an accusation. Stillness felt unsafe. He filled the hours with repetition, more drills, more strain, believing exhaustion would quiet the thoughts. It never did. Because fear does not dissolve through effort, it amplifies. What he did not yet understand was this: intensity born from fear fractures the self. Each motion becomes a negotiation with insecurity. Each success demands another, louder one, just to feel real. The warrior schools were never built to teach violence. That was the first misunderstanding of the young. Combat was merely the surface. The true training was exposure to discomfort, to boredom, to the unbearable mirror of one's own mind. The elders watched him carefully. They did not correct him yet. In ancient discipline, awareness must come before instruction. Correction too early creates compliance, not transformation. So they let him struggle. They let him chase approval through sweat. Let him mistake tension for readiness. Let him believe strength must announce itself to exist, because the first enemy on the path is not failure, it is unawareness. And an unaware man will exhaust himself, fighting ghosts until silence finally corners him. Only when the body is loud does the soul begin to whisper. The moment of reckoning did not arrive as a defeat. There was no blade at his throat, no public failure, no voice raised in judgment. It arrived quietly, during a pause he did not know how to fill. The elders ordered a day without training. No drills, no sparring, no instruction, just presence. He stood in the yard, confused, restless, fingers flexing as if searching for a weapon that was no longer there. Minutes stretched. His breath grew uneven. His eyes scanned the perimeter, inventing threats where none existed. The absence of demand exposed him more brutally than any opponent ever had. This is what modern neuroscience confirms. When the stimulus is removed, the mind reveals its baseline. The nervous system, deprived of external urgency, turns inward, and whatever has been avoided begins to surface. For him, it was unease, then irritation, then fear. His thoughts accused him of wasting time, of falling behind, of being forgotten. His identity, built entirely on exertion, began to shake. If he was not striving, who was he? The elders watched from a distance. They had seen this fracture many times. A man who only knows movement cannot endure stillness. A man who equates effort with worth collapses when effort is removed. By midday, his posture had changed. His shoulders slumped, not from fatigue but from confusion. The sharpness drained from his gaze. He sat, not in meditation, but in surrender to discomfort. His breath came fast at first, then slowed, not by intention, but by exhaustion. And in that slowing, something unfamiliar occurred. Space. Between one thought and the next, there was a gap. Not peace, not clarity, just silence. Brief, fragile, but real. The ancient texts describe this moment with restraint. They do not glorify it. Because awakening does not begin with insight, it begins with disorientation. The ego resists dissolution. The mind protests the loss of control. Yet biology tells the same story. When constant threat perception ends, the parasympathetic system activates. The body recalibrates. Muscles release micro-tensions they did not know they were holding. Breathing deepens. Perception widens. For the first time, he noticed the wind without interpreting it. He heard birds without assigning meaning. He existed without performing. It frightened him. But beneath that fear was something else. Relief. He realized then, without words, that his strength had been brittle, loud but fragile, built on reaction, not grounding. He had trained his body relentlessly while neglecting the command center that guided it. An unforged blade shatters under pressure, not because it is weak, but because it was never tempered. The elders approached only once the noise had settled. One of them spoke, not as correction but as observation. "You move as if chased," he said. "But no enemy follows you. No lecture followed, no technique offered. Just a mirror." That night, the young warrior did not train. He sat longer than he intended. His thoughts still surged, but he no longer chased them. He let them rise, let them fall. He did not win. He did not lose. He endured, and endurance, of silence, of self, of uncertainty, is the first true discipline. Strength had not abandoned him. It had been waiting beneath the noise. What emerges from silence must now be shaped by intention. The warrior met the old man at the edge of the training grounds, where the noise thinned and the air seemed to settle into itself. No announcement marked his arrival. No authority radiated from rank or reputation. The man stood with his weight evenly distributed, hands resting where they fell, breath moving like a tide that had learned patience. He did not bow. He did not instruct. He did not interrupt the warrior's restless pacing. And that, somehow, was the first lesson. The warrior waited for correction. It never came. He waited for challenge. None appeared. Minutes stretched. The silence thickened. Muscles twitched with the impulse to act, to demonstrate readiness, to prove worth. The old man's eyes remained steady, not judging, not approving, simply present. In that gaze, the warrior felt something unfamiliar. Exposure without attack. The mentor finally gestured, not a command but an invitation, to sit. They sat. No words followed. Time, unstructured, began to press inward. The warrior's breath grew shallow, then erratic. Thoughts surged to fill the vacuum. Plans, doubts, old victories replayed with unnecessary volume. Failures rose, uninvited. The mentor did nothing to soothe the noise. He allowed it to crescendo, then burn its own oxygen. Modern neuroscience would call this withdrawal from stimulus. When external inputs are reduced, the brain amplifies internal signals. The default mode network, responsible for self-referential thought, grows louder. The mentor did not need to explain this. He was letting the warrior feel it. Silence, he taught without speech, is confrontational. It removes anesthesia. After a long while, the mentor stood and walked, slowly, to a patch of ground where wind bent the grass. He waited. The warrior followed, uncertain. The old man pointed to the movement of the blades, then to the warrior's chest. Breath met wind. Expansion met release. Still, no words. They practiced breathing as ritual, not technique. Inhale counted by steps. Exhale extended beyond comfort. Pauses inserted where the body begged to rush. The warrior discovered how addicted he was to motion, how quickly discomfort translated into urgency. The mentor did not correct posture or cadence. He watched. Presence sharpened the edges of error more effectively than instruction. In one exercise, the mentor asked the warrior, only with a look, to wait before responding to a falling leaf. Not to catch it, not to track it, simply to wait until the leaf had already landed. The warrior failed repeatedly, hand darting forward, anticipation overwhelming restraint. Each failure revealed the same truth. Reaction had become identity. The science is unambiguous. Impulse control is trained not by exertion, but by delay. The prefrontal cortex strengthens when urges are noticed and not obeyed. The mentor was not teaching passivity. He was teaching containment. Power held, not spent. As dusk approached, the mentor finally spoke, softly, sparingly, as if sound itself were a resource to be conserved. "Stillness does not weaken force," he said. "It organizes it." The words landed because the body had prepared the ground. The warrior felt the first fracture in his self-concept. Strength, he realized, had never been missing, only scattered. Calm was not the absence of power. It was the vessel that kept power from leaking away. That night, as the wind died and the world grew spare, the warrior understood he had not been given anything new, only stripped of what was unnecessary. The silence would follow him, and in the next trial, it would demand obedience under pressure. The next morning arrived without ceremony. No horn, no call to rise. The mentor was already awake, seated where shadow met light, as if he had been there all night. The warrior felt an unfamiliar hesitation before approaching. Something in him wanted to arrive quietly, to not disturb the air. That impulse, too, was noticed. The mentor began the day not with movement but with waiting. He placed a small bowl of water between them, its surface perfectly still. The instruction came in the form of absence. Do nothing until the water moves. Wind brushed past. Birds crossed the sky. Time stretched thin. The warrior's legs ached. His mind protested, yet the bowl remained unmoved. Minutes passed, then longer. The warrior began to understand the cruelty of the exercise. There was no endpoint he could force, no metric he could dominate. This was not endurance against pain, but endurance against meaninglessness. The mentor was dismantling the warrior's dependency on purpose as fuel. In modern terms, he was training distress tolerance, the capacity to remain regulated when reward is delayed and outcome uncertain. Eventually, a tremor ran through the warrior's arm. He adjusted his posture. The water rippled. The mentor's eyes lifted. The lesson was over. No reprimand followed. None was needed. The warrior had felt the cost of unconscious movement. A single adjustment, born of discomfort, had disrupted the field. Presence, he learned, is fragile. It must be guarded not from enemies, but from oneself. Later, they walked through the forest path where light fragmented through leaves. The mentor stopped often, not to rest but to observe. He would pause mid-step, weight suspended, as if listening to something beneath sound. The warrior mirrored him, struggling. Each pause exposed a flood of micro-impulses. Scratch, shift, hurry. The mentor allowed none of it to pass unexamined. "This is where fear hides," the mentor said at last, "in the space you avoid." He explained no further. He did not need to. The warrior felt it. Without motion, old anxieties surfaced. The body sought escape through action. The mentor was not erasing fear. He was removing its disguises. Modern psychology confirms what the ancients practiced intuitively. Avoidance strengthens anxiety. Stillness reverses the hierarchy. When the body remains calm in the presence of unease, the nervous system recalibrates. Threat loses authority. The mentor's silence was rewiring the warrior at a level beneath thought. As the day deepened, the mentor finally allowed controlled motion. Slow forms executed at a fraction of normal speed. Every transition was exposed. Momentum could not hide imbalance. Power could not mask tension. The warrior felt weaker than ever, yet strangely more intact. For the first time, effort and intention aligned. At sunset, the mentor spoke once more. "You believe presence is something you achieve," he said. "It is something you stop interfering with." The words closed the circle. Mastery was subtraction, noise removed, excess cut away. What remained was not softness but density, a calm so concentrated it could fracture chaos. That night, alone, the warrior sat without instruction. The silence returned, but this time it did not threaten. It revealed. Beneath the urge to move, beneath the hunger to prove, there was a steady core that had been waiting for recognition. He understood then. The mentor had not trained him. He had introduced him to himself. With stillness anchored, the world would soon test whether calm could survive impact. Training changed without announcement. One morning, the warrior arrived at the grounds and found them empty, not abandoned, but deliberately bare. No markers, no sparring partners, no rhythm of drills to lean on. Even the mentor was absent. The air felt wider, less accommodating. This was not rest. This was removal. The warrior waited. Hours passed with no instruction. The absence gnawed at him. In earlier days, urgency had given shape to effort. There had always been something to respond to, someone to impress, a metric to chase. Now there was only time, and his own undirected attention. This was the stripping of spectacle. The ancient schools understood something modern culture resists. Performance weakens discipline. When effort feeds on recognition, the nervous system remains reactive, always scanning for validation or threat. Remove the audience, and the ego begins to starve. What remains must sustain itself or collapse. The mentor returned near midday, carrying no weapons, offering no greeting. He led the warrior to a narrow clearing surrounded by uneven ground and placed him at its center. "Stand," he said. No stance was specified, no duration given. The sun climbed, wind shifted, insects circled. The warrior stood. At first he felt capable, proud even. This was simple, but simplicity is deceptive. Without movement, tension accumulates. Muscles search for justification. The mind invents reasons to adjust. Minutes stretched into strain. The mentor began to move around him, not threatening, not instructive, simply existing. At times he brushed past. At times he paused inches away. The warrior's body reacted automatically, micro-flinches, anticipatory tightening, shallow breath. Each response betrayed a hidden fear, the fear of interruption, of unpredictability, of being caught unprepared. "Do not prepare," the mentor said quietly. "Receive." This violated everything the warrior had learned. Preparation had been survival. Anticipation had been intelligence. Yet here, anticipation became noise. Neuroscience names this hypervigilance, a state where the brain predicts threat too early, exhausting itself before danger arrives. The mentor was dismantling that pattern in real time. The warrior's legs trembled. His breath lost rhythm. Panic surfaced, not loud but insistent. The old self would have pushed harder, masked weakness with aggression, but aggression had nowhere to go. There was nothing to strike, nothing to conquer. Only exposure. The mentor introduced controlled adversity. Without warning, he dropped a stone nearby. The sound cracked the air. The warrior's body jumped before thought could intervene. Shame followed instantly. The mentor did not comment. He simply reset the space and continued. Again and again, stimuli arrived. Sudden sounds, movements at the edge of vision, disruptions without pattern. The instruction remained the same. Stand, breathe, receive. No anticipation. No reaction unless action was unavoidable. Something inside the warrior began to fracture. The ego protested. It labeled the exercise pointless, humiliating, inefficient. But beneath that protest was fear. Naked now, without distraction. Fear of losing control. Fear of being seen as unready. Fear of not existing, if not performing. As fatigue deepened, resistance weakened. The warrior noticed a subtle shift. When he stopped bracing against uncertainty, his breath slowed on its own. Muscles released without command. Awareness widened. He could feel the ground without gripping it, hear sounds without chasing them. The chaos around him no longer demanded response. The mentor finally spoke. "The man who must prove strength," he said, "is ruled by those who know how to provoke." The words did not instruct, they exposed. By evening, the warrior was no longer standing to endure. He was standing to remain. Presence was no longer an effort. It was a condition. The need to be witnessed had thinned, almost dissolved. The old self was weakening, and in that weakening, something quieter and far more dangerous began to take its place. The final stage of the day arrived without spectacle, just as everything now did. The mentor led the warrior beyond the clearing, into a space where training had never occurred before. Uneven ground, loose stones, wind funneling unpredictably through narrow passages of rock and tree. This was not a place designed for practice. It was a place designed to interfere. "Remain grounded," the mentor said, "while everything else moves." He did not explain how. Chaos was introduced slowly at first. The mentor walked around the warrior, then past him, then abruptly changed direction. Sounds echoed and vanished. Shadows crossed the warrior's field of vision. Each disruption tempted reaction. Each moment tested whether stillness could survive interference. At first, the warrior failed quietly. His weight shifted too early, his attention narrowed, his breath shortened. But something had changed since the morning. The panic no longer escalated. It appeared, was noticed, and then lost momentum. This was the difference. Modern science describes this as decoupling stimulus from response. When awareness precedes action, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, loses its authority to hijack behavior. The warrior was not suppressing reaction. He was outgrowing it. The mentor increased the pressure. Without warning, he pushed lightly against the warrior's shoulder, not to unbalance him, but to invite resistance. The old instinct surged, counter, dominate, prove. The warrior felt it rise and let it pass. He adjusted only enough to remain vertical. No excess, no display. The mentor nodded once. Later, he released objects nearby, branches snapping, stones tumbling. The warrior remained where he was, attention wide, breath steady. The sounds registered but did not command. For the first time, chaos unfolded around him without pulling him into its rhythm. The ego's final defense surfaced then, not fear, but identity loss. If strength is not displayed, who am I? If reaction is not required, what do I do? The questions arrived with surprising grief. The warrior realized how much of his self-worth had been built on urgency, on being needed in crisis, on defining himself by response. Stillness felt like erasure. The mentor spoke, as if hearing the unspoken. "What leaves you," he said, "was never you." The words struck deeper than any blow. As dusk approached, the mentor instructed the warrior to move, not fast, not slow, but without anticipation. Each step began only when the previous one completed. The warrior discovered something startling. Movement without urgency felt heavier, denser, more decisive. Power conserved itself, balance improved, vision widened. Ancient systems called this economy of motion. Modern biomechanics confirms it. Unnecessary muscular tension degrades efficiency and reaction speed. Calm does not slow response, it refines it. The warrior felt it in his body. When action finally arose, it was precise, inevitable, and strangely quiet. At the end of the session, the mentor stood across from him. No challenge was issued, no test announced. The two men simply faced one another. The warrior did nothing, and for the first time, that nothing contained everything. He was no longer scanning for threat, no longer rehearsing dominance. His presence filled the space without pressing against it. The mentor met his gaze and held it, not as judge, not as teacher, but as equal. The calm man, the mentor said, is dangerous not because he is violent, but because he is unreachable. The sentence closed something. That night alone, the warrior felt the symbolic death complete. The self that needed friction to feel alive had dissolved. In its place stood something steadier, unprovoked, unhurried, internally governed. He did not feel powerful. He felt free. And soon, that freedom would be tested, not in training, but in confrontation where restraint would cost more than aggression. The test did not announce itself as a test. There was no formal challenge, no ritualized beginning. The warrior was sent beyond the familiar grounds into terrain that offered no certainty. Broken paths, unfamiliar voices, movement without pattern. This was intentional. True mastery, the mentor had taught, does not appear when conditions are controlled. It appears when they are not. Others were there, men trained in speed, force, reaction. They carried urgency like a banner. Eyes darted, hands tightened. Each sound demanded response. Each moment threatened escalation. The warrior felt it too, the old reflex stirring, but it did not take control. He stood where he was placed, breath descending naturally, awareness wide and uncompressed. The noise around him registered without command. His nervous system did not spike. It listened. Modern science would describe this as coherence, a state where heart rate, breath, and neural activity align. Reaction time improves, vision widens, decision-making sharpens. The ancients had no language for vagal tone or parasympathetic dominance, yet they built entire paths around achieving it. The first provocation came quickly. A sudden movement to his left, a raised voice, a deliberate attempt to draw attention, to trigger anticipation. Another man reacted instantly, stepping forward. Posture aggressive, energy leaking outward. The situation escalated around him. The warrior did nothing. This was not avoidance. It was discernment. He had learned the difference. Action without necessity is noise. Noise attracts chaos. His stillness unsettled the others. Humans are conditioned to mirror urgency. When it is not returned, the mind searches for explanation. Doubt creeps in. Aggression loses rhythm when it finds no echo. A second provocation followed, closer now. A hand moved into his space. The warrior did not retreat. He adjusted only enough to remain balanced, gaze steady, expression unchanged. No threat, no submission. The silence spoke. Neuroscience confirms what unfolded in that moment. Emotional contagion works both ways. Calm, when held without tension, regulates others more effectively than force. The warrior's presence altered the field. Breathing slowed around him. Movements became less coordinated. When action finally became unavoidable, it emerged cleanly. One step, one redirection, no wasted motion, no follow-through beyond necessity. The body moved as if it had already decided long ago. There was no aggression in it, only clarity. The encounter ended almost as soon as it began. Those who had rushed now hesitated. Those who had postured now recalibrated. The warrior stood unchanged, as if nothing had occurred. His heart rate returned to baseline within seconds. Fear did not linger because it had not been resisted. The mentor watched from a distance, not intervening, not correcting. He had already withdrawn instruction. This was no longer training, this was revelation. Later, as the space emptied and the noise dissolved, the mentor approached for the last time. "You are no longer practicing calm," he said. "You are resting in it." The warrior understood. Calm was no longer a tool to be deployed. It was his default state. Presence no longer required effort. It exerted authority simply by existing. He felt no triumph, no hunger for recognition. The need to prove had vanished completely. What remained was unshakability, a still center that chaos could not penetrate. The mentor turned away then, his role complete, fading not in drama but in inevitability. The path had never been about becoming dangerous. It had been about becoming unreachable. With the teacher gone, the warrior would step forward alone, carrying not technique but identity. With the mentor gone, nothing collapsed. That was the final confirmation. The warrior expected some sense of loss, a void where instruction had lived, a silence that demanded guidance. Instead, there was continuity. Breath still descended. Awareness still expanded. Decisions still arose without friction. What had been taught no longer required a teacher. This was the difference between learning and embodiment. He walked alone through uncertain ground, not scanning for threat, not rehearsing outcomes. Each step arrived only when needed. Each pause carried weight. The world continued its chaos. Voices rising, movements clashing, intentions colliding, but none of it breached his center. This was not detachment, it was intimacy without entanglement. When confronted again later by men who relied on speed and intimidation, the pattern repeated itself with quiet inevitability. They moved first. They overcommitted. They burned energy trying to control outcomes before understanding them. The warrior waited. His silence did not provoke rage. It provoked doubt, and doubt, unmanaged, fractures coordination faster than fear. He saw it in their posture, their timing, their breath. The ancient path had trained his perception as much as his body. When motion was required, it was final and sufficient. No flourish, no dominance display. The encounter resolved itself with minimal disruption, like a stone placed correctly in a flowing river. Afterward, there was no surge of adrenaline to come down from, no replaying of moments. His nervous system returned to stillness as naturally as it had left it. This, modern science confirms, is the mark of true regulation. Stress responses that activate precisely and deactivate completely. The warrior understood then the full scope of the transformation. Fear had not been eliminated. It had been integrated. It no longer hijacked behavior because it had been faced without distraction, stripped of drama, and allowed to speak its truth. What it revealed was not weakness, but misplaced identity. He no longer identified as a man who reacts. He identified as a man who remains. This was the culmination of the ancient discipline, not invincibility, not dominance, but internal sovereignty, the ability to stand in uncertainty without leaking energy, to move without urgency, to speak without needing volume, to act without needing validation. Presence had become authority. Those who encountered him felt it without explanation. Conversations slowed, aggression softened, even conflict reorganized itself around his stillness. This was not mysticism, it was biology responding to coherence. Systems naturally entrain to stability when it is genuine. The warrior carried no symbols of rank, no visible markers of mastery. His power was not announced, it was inferred. He remembered the mentor's earliest lesson, that stillness is confrontational. Now he understood why. Stillness forces the world to reveal itself. Without your noise to hide behind, others must face their own. As he moved forward on his path, no longer seeking tests, no longer avoiding them, he carried only one discipline: to remain unshakable regardless of outcome. The ancient path did not end with him standing above others. It ended with him standing within himself, and that was enough. The path now continues not as a journey toward power, but as a quiet, lifelong practice of becoming impossible to move from center.